Half-Life is an influential title in many ways, and perhaps the biggest and most important impact it had was in the mod scene. Valve embraced fan modifications of its games and provided players with the tools to make them, a practice they've continued to this day. Almost immediately after Half-Life's release, third-party mods ranging from simple graphic swaps to custom levels to full-on total conversions began popping up, inspired by a love for Half-Life and a desire to create. This continued with the release of Half-Life 2 and the Source engine, which has seen an impressive number of mods in the years since its release. And for many, one of the most anticipated Half-Life 2 mods was Black Mesa, a remake of the original Half-Life on the Source engine built from the ground up. The project began life in 2004, was initially released as a standalone mod in 2012, and was finally released into its 1.0 version in March 2020. It took 16 years, but the long-awaited remake of Valve's seminal game is finally complete, and it's not just a well-done remake of a classic, but it also shows the passion and dedication a game can bring out in its fans. But was it worth the long development time? Let's find out. Black Mesa's origins lie in Half-Life Source, Valve's official port of Half-Life from the Gold Source engine to Source released in 2004. This port is probably most famous now for its glitches, though most of them were introduced in later versions of the game, but what people did have a problem with at launch was that the port was just that, a port. People expected that it would feature more graphical enhancements or updated level design, more in line with a remake than a port. They knew that Source was capable of creating an entirely new kind of experience, and Gabe Newell himself even proclaimed that it was inevitable that fans would recreate Half-Life in Source. And only months after the port came out, work began to make that a reality. One mod team announced Leak Free in September 2004, and another team announced the Half-Life Source Overhaul project 1 month later. The two teams decided to combine their efforts and unify both projects under one group that would come to be known as Crowbar Collective. The mod was soon titled Black Mesa Source, and the team received an endorsement from Valve, though they requested the Source be dropped from its name since it wasn't an official Valve release. Crowbar Collective's goal was to both recreate Half-Life in the Source engine while taking advantage of the new engine's capabilities and to improve on aspects of the original that were poorly received. In particular, the group wanted to drastically redesign the Zen levels, which are often cited as the worst part of the original game. In keeping with Half-Life tradition, the game was announced to be released in 2009, and then the release date was pushed back. The developers emphasized perfecting the game over getting it out quickly, and as Valve updated Source, Crowbar Collective needed to ensure the game would work on the new versions and still pass their quality control. The game was first made available in 2012 with a free standalone release that contained the entire game up to the Zen levels. From there, Crowbar Collective decided to go with a commercial release with the approval of Valve, and Black Mesa entered early access in 2015. The game received continuous updates and refinements until the developers began releasing the Zen levels into beta in 2019, with the full game reaching 1.0 status on March 6, 2020. Since the game is on Source, it obviously plays more like Half-Life 2 than the original, with features like sprinting, holding onto objects, and the less slippery controls transferring over. Weirdly enough, the sprinting and flashlight don't consume any energy, which seems odd, but maybe that's just because I'm so used to Half-Life 2. Most of the gameplay ideas from the original translate over more or less intact, as weapon and enemy behaviors are, in most cases, identical. The HECU soldiers are the biggest example, as their AI was updated to be more advanced and way more difficult than in Half-Life, so much so that Crowbar Collective had to alter the AI to be less challenging. But even enemies like the alien grunt and controllers were buffed, as the grunts can now jump onto and off of ledges, and the controllers are able to mind control peaceful Vortigaunts in Zen to attack you. While most of the weapons have minor adjustments to factors like max ammo or reload times, they typically don't have any major changes. The sole exception to this is the long jump module, which is now activated while in the air and allows for better mid-air movement, although you're now limited to 3 jumps before it needs to recharge. It feels less awkward and fits better for the new level design of Zen, but we'll talk more about that later. The core gameplay isn't that different from Half-Life 2, even if it marks a significant evolution from the original game, but in terms of the level design and aesthetics, it's almost a complete departure from the source material. Black Mesa follows the same storyline as Half-Life, as you still play as Gordon Freeman trying to escape from the titular research facility after the resonance cascade begins wreaking havoc. Your journey is the same, but Black Mesa expands on dialogue present in the original that incorporates nods to other games in the series and occasionally makes snide jabs and self-referential jokes a la Half-Life 2.
You know, Barney's been pretty scarce around these parts. Guess his bar tab must have finally caught up with him.
The game doesn't change anything to the overall structure, but instead alters the game's maps and locations to create a game that is familiar, yet also clearly its own thing. Many of Half-Life's set pieces are still present, but they've been changed in minor or major ways that put a slightly new spin on them. The end result is a game that is alternatively familiar and brand new at the same time, balancing a one-to-one translation and a complete reimagining while never going too far one way or another. I was worried that my knowledge of Half-Life would make it hard for me to figure out how to proceed through redesigned areas, but thankfully this ended up not being the case. Whenever an area is significantly changed, the game makes sure to direct you where you need to go, and maps often have new scripted sequences to help guide players unfamiliar with Half-Life. And most overhauled levels were in need of improvement anyway, either because of outdated design or making certain sections feel less tedious. Surface tension is a prime example, as it has been significantly expanded to now be double the length of the original. But the levels are redesigned in ways that feel natural and mesh well with the spirit of the original while also establishing Black Mesa's own identity. Even minor tweaks like the trains and on a rail shutting off if you leave the platform does wonders for making the level less frustrating, and improvements like that are prevalent throughout the game. But as I stated, the Zen levels are where the game really deviates from the original, as Black Mesa's Zen section is quite a significant enhancement. Black Mesa pulls out the basic principles from the original Zen levels, specifically low gravity platforming in natural terrain that's a complete contrast from the research facility, and constructs an entirely new experience around them. Zen introduces some cool new lore that builds on details from the original, including why Black Mesa scientists were interested in Zen in the first place and how the aliens have reacted to the human world. The Zen levels are much longer than Half-Life's, taking around 4 hours to beat compared to the original game's 1 hour, and while the levels feature many of the same segments as the originals, comparing them to each other almost seems unfair. There's no doubt that this Zen is better, purely thanks to the level design and better long jumping, but I still think it's the worst part of the game. The first 2 levels are definite improvements, as Zen gives you a much better feel for the low gravity platforming over a few maps instead of the original game's 1. And Gonarch's Lair expands the boss fight into a level-long chase that emphasizes putting you in danger rather than just letting you pump the Gonarch full of ammo. Even the Nihilith is a better fight, taking place in one arena and removing sub-areas, as well as giving the boss many more attacks than before. But Interloper, the second to last chapter, is where I feel like Crowbar Collective got way too overzealous in trying to make something new, because this level just drags on forever, especially in the Zen factory that takes up most of the chapter. I mean, the Gargantua chase is awesome, and the first half of the factory is all well and good, but afterwards I was just exhausted, and the elevator at the end is just tedious to the point of frustration. There were so many instances where I just wanted the level to be over, and it didn't help that there are plenty of times where it looks like the chapter is going to end only for you to enter another giant room. I get that this is the penultimate level and it should be big and epic, like the Citadel was in Half-Life 2, but it just goes way too far overboard. Zen does look amazing, however, updating the duller but still appealing look from Half-Life and making it much more vibrant and colorful. Thanks to the Source engine, the backgrounds are much more dynamic and mark a significant upgrade over the floating platforms in a box approach. And each section has its own color scheme that helps set the varying tones and moods of the area, so if nothing else, Zen is definitely visually varied and was almost worth the wait on its art direction alone. That's not to say that the rest of the game doesn't look good though, because Black Mesa's graphics are certainly an upgrade over the originals. I don't know if I'm a fan of the character design, but the environments are top-notch, perfectly recapturing the essence of the original game while not being afraid to differentiate itself. Even maps that are entirely different still maintain that same Half-Life feel, showcasing the same demolished landscapes with a noticeable glow-up. I also like how, for the most part, Black Mesa doesn't reuse Half-Life sound effects, which are certainly iconic, but would be counterintuitive to what this remake is all about. Instead, the sound design is heavier and more industrial, with weapon and environmental noises having a distinctly heavier sound than the originals. You really appreciate how the sound design creates an atmosphere that may produce a similar result as Half-Life's, but is different in execution. Complementing this is the soundtrack by Joel Nielsen, which goes in a different direction than Kelly Bailey's work, especially the original's music. Black Mesa's soundtrack features a more electronic orchestral style that also mixes in hard rock in the vein of Kelly Bailey's later tracks for the series, and have a darker and more somber and melancholy mood overall. The songs may not sound like they belong in a Half-Life game, but that's to Black Mesa's benefit, as it helps to create a unique experience, using Half-Life as a basis to explore new ideas rather than as a template to copy. And that's what Black Mesa really is, not a straight remake of Half-Life, but a means to show just how much the community cares about this franchise and what it's inspired them to make. Even if it was intended at first to recreate the base game in the Source engine, it's since come to represent the love and passion that Half-Life has instilled in its fanbase, but even as a game itself, it's a great experience that was absolutely worth the wait. It won't replace the original Half-Life, as that game is still worth playing, but Black Mesa provides a unique take on the game that helped pioneer the modern first-person shooter and reinvents it into a whole new creation. I can't say that it's perfect, as the difficulty isn't as fair as in Half-Life, and Xen does stretch on way too long, but the quality of what we've got is impressive to say the least. Now, if you're a Half-Life fan, you've probably already played Black Mesa, but if you were on the fence about it, it is definitely worth playing. I hesitate to call it the definitive way to play through Half-Life because, again, it's too much of its own thing to be compared to the source material. It should be appreciated on its own and not just be held up to the classic that inspired it, but if you couldn't get into the original because of how dated it is, Black Mesa is a better option. With all that said, I'm curious to see where Crowbar Collective can go from here with another project. They've proven that they can make a great Half-Life game, but whether or not they can evolve beyond that remains to be seen. Hopefully it'll be on a smaller scale considering how long this game took to complete, but if Black Mesa is anything to go by, the developers have the potential to become a force to be reckoned with.